Sunday, August 24th, 2014, and the reporters are looking at the big picture through the lens of the small. First up, a reporter's exclusive, textbook or beatdown. This man looks like he's giving up, so why does he get this? The media in Missouri. Is the press taking sides? We talked to a reporter on the ground in Ferguson and a former sheriff with some lessons from the RNC. Black helicopters, without warning, military exercises in the heart of the Twin Cities. What perfect timing. Whose bright idea was this? And perfect pitch. The first little leaguer to make the cover of Sports Illustrated. And her name is Monet. All that plus the Breakfast Club talks Ferguson and race in America. Really, what could go wrong? The Reporter starts right now. Hey everyone, thanks for making the Reporters part of your Sunday. Regardless of where you stand on what's been happening in Ferguson, Missouri this week, one thing is clear. There is a gap between how police officers are trained and what the public, especially communities of color, believe is acceptable. We're not taking sides here, just saying there is a difference in expectations. And we begin with a video of a Minneapolis police arrest that illustrates just that divide. The sound you hear is a howling police canine as the chase began last February. Up ahead, a stolen car, behind the wheel, James Mitchell, and his passenger, his uncle, Robert Lilienfeld.
I downshifted it and turned it off. I did everything I could.
Who says he had no idea the car was hot and was trying to escape.
I'm talking to my daughter on the phone. She's like, well, just punch him in the face or something. She says, do what you have to do.
The chase lasted 30 minutes through downtown and North Minneapolis, topping 100 miles an hour, until it ends on 394 and Penn, with the transmission catching on fire.
The car was in flames. I mean, there was flames shooting, this high over the roof.
Lilienfeld jumps out, throws his cane, and puts his hands in the air. His backpack in one hand, cell phone in the other.
I kept telling him I didn't do nothing. Why are you doing this to me?
Lilienfeld gets on his knees and then on the ground.
My hands were out like this. They had no cause to do what they did to me.
But a Minneapolis police officer will jump on his back and even punch him a couple times around the head and neck.
They ground my face into the freeway, almost cut my lip completely off, chipped all my teeth.
There's just no possible rational explanation for what they did to this man.
His attorney, Mike Patton, is the same lawyer representing the family of Terrence Franklin, the unarmed man police shot in a South Minneapolis basement when he allegedly grabbed their weapon.
You can have all the experts you want that support police coming in and trying to explain this away. It's the public that's going to see that this is not reasonable conduct for any professional police officer.
An expert like Joe Dutton.
Nice job, quick job for somebody struggling like that. That was handled very professionally.
A retired Golden Valley police officer who trains police and is frequently called on as a defense witness.
Yet this person still wants to struggle, still wants to fight.
In his view, the officers didn't know that was a cell phone and not a gun. And he says Lilienfeld appears to be resisting and not listening.
And sometimes it takes striking with hands, and sometimes it takes manipulations of joints and things of that nature in order to get people to comply. It's called pain compliance. Officers are taught that.
He says for the most part what the officers did was textbook and took me out to demonstrate.
The next point, I'm breaking down his arm, and I'm going to come in here and I'm going to pin the back of his head and the back of his neck. And this is to control the head, because if you control the head, you control the body. I have this cuff on, right, this position right here. I'm going to say, bring your left hand back to me. Bring your left hand back. I'm going to bring it here, and I'm just going to put my cuff on here. And he'll be handcuffed at that point. Then I would roll him over this way.
In the police report, the officers say that's exactly what they were trying to do, but that Lilienfeld bucked the officer and threw him off his back and was tucking his hands under his body. Dutton, for one, believes there's a real divide between what the public perceives as excessive force and how police are trained. If you had kind of hurt me, my response might be to struggle a little bit, and you interpret that as noncompliance. He says too often suspects want to argue their case when they should simply be quiet and cooperate. Take-home lesson for civilians is don't struggle. If you struggle, it only escalates.
That's right.
And a few feet away, that's exactly what happened to the driver of the car, arrested by sheriff deputies, not MPD. There was no scuffle, no punches. Was the difference the officers cuffing him, the behavior of the suspect, or both? The answer may have more to do with how you perceive law enforcement than how you see the video.
I mean, I'm sure they're nervous too. You know, they have a reason to be scared and stuff, but they don't have to abuse their, privileges like that.
So Lilienfeld was never charged with a crime, and by now you may have guessed he is planning a lawsuit. He also filed a complaint with the Civil Rights Department's Office of Police Conduct Review, and of the 85 complaints they have received recently, Chief Janae Harteau has disciplined only one officer with a written reprimand. So let's get one thing on the table about Ferguson, Missouri. None of us really know exactly what happened between Officer Darren Wilson and Mike Brown, and it may be a couple of months before all the facts are in. But it appears many in the media who are framing this debate have already made up their minds that something is pretty rotten in the Show Me State.
You guys do me a favor. I'm going to ask that you guys wait and let me go talk to the gentleman on the truck. Okay?
To the media, it seemed like the rules kept changing in Ferguson. Garrett Tenney is there for Fox News.
Every night is a little different here in Ferguson. Along the main street where the protests have been, it seems like each night there's a little different area that police try to cordon off the media.
But for police, the rules have changed too.
There isn't really a good definition of who is a journalist.
Because everyone's calling themselves a journalist.
Everyone's a journalist.
Former Ramsey County Sheriff Bob Fletcher saw it firsthand during the Republican National Convention 6 years ago when a blogger was indistinguishable from an anarchist. 22 journalists were arrested, most swept up with protesters after refusing to leave an area. The same thing that's happening in Ferguson.
You're violating state-imposed curfew. You must continue to disperse peacefully, or you'll be subject to arrest.
And I think at the point that the media decides to suit up with a gas mask inside the protest area, they've crossed the line.
How so? Why is that the line for you?
Well, I mean, you've been given ample opportunity to leave the assembly area.
And we hadn't realized it, but there were members, protesters that had put on t-shirts that said media on there. Police officers come rushing towards us saying, move, get out of the way. And they grab these individuals that were there hiding amongst us, dragged them out and then arrested them and took them away.
But there's also something about the angle of the coverage, quite literally. The camera almost always from the perspective of the protesters, facing the menacing police in riot gear.
You're definitely getting that sense as you watch it, because you're seeing the media embedded in some of those protests, walking through with the protesters, being in between.
University of Missouri journalism professor Amy Simons believes some of the coverage has crossed the line. In particular, CNN's Don Lemon, who's been passionate but not exactly objective.
You can see what's happening.
I was really disappointed to see how on his sleeve he put his feelings.
It's the kind of story where reporters can make a name for themselves and will be tempted to push the envelope. But by Wednesday night, the journalists nearly outnumbered the protesters. And despite the 24/7 coverage, after 2 weeks, we still know very little about what really happened between a white police officer and an unarmed black teenager. And in some ways, this seems custom made for the cable networks.
It absolutely is. There are some really compelling images of what's going on there. And, CNN is kind of pulling that Malaysian Airlines card again. That if they stick with it, people are going to continue to watch.
The best thing that could happen to de-escalate this is to have less media there. I hate to say it, but until there's another crisis that pops up somewhere in the country, this one is going to continue to escalate.
And by the end of the week, they were pulling out. So there's been a lot of talk this week about how this country's local police forces are starting to look more and more militarized. So what perfect timing to have the Department of Defense, without any advance warning, fly black helicopters without lights weaving in and out of the skyscrapers in downtown Minneapolis and St. Paul. Drills they were conducting with Minneapolis and St. Paul police. We asked Fox 9's Rob Olson what this was all about. My question is, what are they doing? I saw the black helicopters last night in downtown Minneapolis. What are they up to?
They won't say exactly what they're up to. It's a U.S. military, Department of Defense. And, we go through Minneapolis and St. Paul police. They're trying to put out the word, but they're just assisting this and say, the U.S. government's not real forthcoming on what exactly they're doing, except urban kind of tactical training. And so does that mean for cityscapes in other parts of the world? Does that mean for domestic situations? I don't know. That's where your imagination just kind of runs wild.
Your imagination does run wild. So regular viewers of Fox 9 will already be very familiar with the story CNN is featuring tonight on the cult known as the River Road Fellowship. In our story last February, 2 young women came forward to say Victor Bernard sexually abused them for more than a decade, beginning when they were just 12 and 13 years old. Our investigation led to charges being filed against Bernard, who's been on the run ever since. Tonight, John Walsh of America's Most Wanted fame picks up the chase in his new show called The Hunt. Here's a clip.
After months, the local news in Minnesota contacted me through an email and said he had heard about the story and wanted to see if he could help with some media if it wouldn't help get the case rolling.
To his followers, Victor Bernard is a spiritual leader, but the Pine County Sheriff calls him a pedophile, plain and simple. And the ones who finally had the courage to come forward may have been his youngest victims.
And it seemed like after that aired, everyone seemed to be making it like a really big deal.
Good evening. I'm Nancy Grace. I want to thank you for being with us. Bombshell tonight. How did this happen?
I watched an advanced screening of it this week. It's very good. Some actor reenactments, but that was pretty good as well. And given Walsh's track record with Fox's America's Most Wanted, leading to the arrest of more than 1,000 fugitives, I imagine Victor Bernard will soon be caught as well. Still to come, The Breakfast Club. We are talking Ferguson, the media, and the 13-year-old kid with one hell of a fastball. We're coming right back.
While I understand the passions and the anger that arise over the death of Michael Brown, giving into that anger by looting or carrying guns and even attacking the police only serves to raise tensions and stir chaos. It undermines rather than advancing justice.
Powerful words from the commander-in-chief, but in a couple days later, he is photographed golfing in Martha's Vineyard. The New York Times critical of that in a front-page story on Friday. Certainly the optics of that are bad. Welcome everyone to The Breakfast Club. I am here with Robin Robinson, former Fox 9 news anchor, also the arts ambassador for Twin Cities International, and Jerry McAfee, the pastor over at New Salem Baptist Church in North Minneapolis on Bryant Avenue. Thanks for joining us. You were just saying this is the first time they've been on the same side of the camera together.
The very first time in 20 plus years that he and I are on the same side of a subject.
Let's talk about Ferguson, Missouri. Lots of people are looking at this through the prism of civil rights. Good idea, or is that unfair to Ferguson, Missouri? Robin?
Of course it's a civil rights matter. It's not just what's happening with Michael Brown. It's Trayvon Martin. It's Eric Garner. And it goes all the way back to 1990 when I was covering news here and Tysel Nelson. There is a problem. There is a problem when you see parents in the African American community have to tell their young black men how to conduct themselves when they go out for fear of them being victimized by police. So yes, this is a civil rights issue. Something that white parents may not have to do or may not feel that they have to do. Reverend McAfee?
No, they don't. Another person that we don't want to forget is Q the blacksmith, as well as Terrence Franklin. Ferguson is a picture of what can possibly happen in most urban areas right now. The tensions are high. I'm kind of a skeptic. I believe that the helicopters flying through the crowd during all of this, through Minneapolis during this time, is to send a signal.
You sincerely believe that?
Of course.
Because they say it was planned months in advance.
I don't trust them.
I have a problem with the militarization of a local police, law enforcement anyway.
If you get a collective of people that's disenfranchised, economically, educationally, otherwise, and you push them in the areas, opportunities are denied. You got drugs in there, you got guns in there. The police ain't nuts. They can begin to feel some of the tension that's rising as a result of some of the things that happens to us on a daily basis. ACLU, we're 9 times more likely in Minneapolis to be arrested for marijuana than any other city in the country. 9 times. The amount of stops for tail lights and all of this stuff started years ago with weed and seed and all of that. So we're constantly under pressure. We're pressure from lack of employment, that we're pressure from walking, and they get tickets for jaywalking and all kinds of stuff. It's a powder cake. And so they can feel this.
Absolutely, and I have to agree with this. When people try to question, they say, well, I don't understand why these people started looting. Nobody condones looting, but when you're African American, you can understand some of the underlying reasons why. And I try to give some of my white friends the same example. When you're at work and you're not getting the job you want, you're not getting the pay that you need, when people are putting undue pressure on you and they just may not like you and just pile it on. Some of the ways people react is that they steal from work because they're angry. And it's not just about work. It's all those underlying feelings because they're unhappy. The same thing happens when you live in a community that has Code 4 specifically for stopping you. When you've got low economic hopes, that the schools are unequal, that you've got teen pregnancy and a lack of education and no jobs coming in, and the pressure starts to mount. People react, maybe not logically, but they react for those reasons.
And the shame of that is it turns so many other people off the debate. I want to share a couple poll results in the New York Times on Friday that I think are very interesting. They were asked, how are race relations in the United States? 47% say generally good, more white people, by the way, generally say that. 44% say generally bad, more black people. But I think this is interesting. Do you think the protesters' actions in Ferguson have gone too far? 67% of the whites say they have, 43% of the blacks. Now, what that tells me, and it depends on what you mean by the protesters, but that tells me that a lot of people do agree that this notion of we are aggrieved and we are making a point.
I think you're seeing it around the world, and Ferguson is no different from what's happening in Athens, Greece. When people don't think that they have their means and they don't think that they have a voice, they react violently. And then there's people who capitalize on it too, by coming into the community from outside the community and just making things worse.
Devil's advocate, though, does it shut down the debate? If we are trying to look at Ferguson as a civil rights issue, doesn't that just that turns off so many people?
It turns them off,
not just in white America, but in
debate.
America. I mean, just kind of our basic understanding of how we discuss these issues. I think it's a turnoff for a lot of people. It stops the conversation.
We've been turned off for a long time. Okay, we've been turned off for a long time. No one had this approach when they're protesting in Egypt and other places against oppression, but now they have an issue when we stand up against oppression.
I think
what's the distinction?
It's a small part of it too, because you're just looking at what happened in Ferguson. For the last several weeks, they have been protesting in New York City the death of Eric Garner, the young man who was selling loose cigarettes on the street and was put in a chokehold. It was handled completely different by a sophisticated police force that's not bumbling and bigoted like the one in Missouri. The police chief came out in advance, had a press conference. The name of the officer was released immediately. A big difference. Details of the killing were released immediately because it was caught on video. The officer was taking his badge and his gun away, and right now Al Sharpton is meeting with the head of the Archdiocese, having calm conversation, peaceful protests. But when it's handled differently, you don't get enough details about how many bullets were put into Michael Brown, the name of the officer is not released, and then you have an overreaction of a militarized police force, you're going to have an explosion. Not to mention also the media playing victim and also insider.
Gave me a lot to chew on, and I'm going to switch gears. Something happier. Monet Davis, an awesome little baseball player. She's a little leaguer, didn't make it to the finals, but this girl's got a 70-mile-an-hour fastball. A lot of people are holding her up as this icon, as going to be the next female Major League Baseball player. Is that fair to do to a 13-year-old girl?
Is that fair to do to a girl? I mean, the whole thing has been pitched by the media as this female phenomenon. It's up to Little League officials and Major League Baseball to stop that stigma. This girl is good and she's got the confidence to back it up. She's got the savvy to know how to handle the media. She is a pro. And it shouldn't be just she's an athlete, and she deserves to play without scrutiny as a female.
And she's really good at an interview, especially when she's talking about baseball. You love this kid, I know.
Definitely, definitely. And to see African American playing baseball today in our society, when many times you don't see it a whole lot. Like when I was growing up, baseball was right along with basketball. We get through playing basketball, we go play baseball. In the inner city now, you don't see that a lot. Right. The other good story is the team from Chicago, all African American, and when you see Monet as well, it gives you a bit more hope.
We're coming back with On the Record right next. Time to go on the record about seizing the moment. So maybe you're a cynic like me and thought you've seen enough ice bucket challenges for ALS. And then I saw Anthony Carvajal's video on YouTube along with 7 million other people. Take a listen. So it's kind of funny with him in a bikini, but then you learn that ALS runs in his entire family. He's caring for a mother who was diagnosed when he was in high school, and he was diagnosed 6 months ago. He's only 26.
Right now, my hands are starting to atrophy away. They're getting weak. Having trouble starting my car, buttoning my shirt. Eventually, I won't be able to use my arms or hands at all. Eventually, I won't be able to walk, talk, and breathe on my own. And that's the real truth of what ALS is. It's devastating.
So intense. He says he gets two responses. Either people haven't heard of ALS, also known as Lou Gehrig's, or they do and they are totally freaked out by it. 30,000 people have the neurodegenerative disease, too few to make it worthwhile for the drug companies. So far, the Ice Bucket Challenge raising nearly $23 million for ALS research in the last 3 weeks. So it's more than dumping ice on celebrities. It destigmatizes a terrifying disease. And as Anthony says to the critics, don't worry, the internet will soon go back to cat videos. But for now, ALS is having its moment. So lighten up. And if talking about ALS makes you feel uncomfortable, that's okay too. It's scary. It should. That's the reporters for this Sunday. We hope to see you back here next week.